Where to even begin with this one? This is one that has been on my heart, one of those love letters again. It's the difference between guilt and shame, failure and success. I hope you find it meaningful. Shame, the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. Okay, so if shame is internal, something that we feel is wrong with who we are, then what is guilt? Guilt is adaptive and helpful. It's holding something we've done or failed to do up against our values and feeling psychological discomfort. We can use it to be better.
I love in Gifts of Imperfection where you say, if we share a shame story with the wrong person, they can easily become one more piece of flying debris, so well said, in an already dangerous storm. We want solid connection in a situation like this, something akin to a sturdy tree firmly planted in the ground. We definitely want to avoid the following. The friend who hears the story and actually feels shame for you, she gasps and confirms how horrified you should be, then there's awkward silence.
Oh, yeah.
Then you have to make her feel better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that happen?
Oh, my goodness. Where you're like, yeah.
Oh,
so
God.
now you have to now put your shingle out for that person. Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm still in shame and I'm one less friend down. I'm like, and you're gone.
The friend who responds with sympathy. I feel so sorry for you rather than empathy. I get it. I feel with you and I've been there. If you want to see a shame cyclone turn deadly, throw one of these at it. Oh, you poor thing. Yes. Or the incredibly passive aggressive Southern version of sympathy. I love this. Bless your heart. Yes.
That gives me the shivers when you say that. That's
Yes.
like, I'm fixing to tear you down and God is on my side.
Yeah.
It is the worst.
We've all been there. The friend who needs you to be the pillar of worthiness and authenticity, she can't help because she's too disappointed in your imperfections because you've let her down. Yes.
Painful.
The friend who is so uncomfortable with vulnerability that she scolds, how did you let this happen? The friend who's all about making it better and out of her own discomfort refuses to acknowledge that you can actually be crazy and make terrible choices. You're exaggerating, the person says. It wasn't that bad.
Right.
Yes. And the friend who confuses connection with the opportunity to one-up you. Well, that's nothing. Listen to what happened to me. So when you open yourself up and you're vulnerable enough to share something that has shamed you, what are you really looking for?
I'm looking for the person who loves me, not despite my vulnerability and imperfection, but because of it. I'm looking for what I call my move the body friends. I'm looking for the folks who are going to show up and wade through the deep with me. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a myth that you should have more than one or two of those. You know, the TV commercials that show 15 of us laughing and doing that kind of stuff. You got one person in your life who you can call and say, I just told a bold-faced lie to someone I care about and I have no way to get out of it, and I'm in a shame storm of epic proportion. You have one person that look at you and say, all right, let's do this thing. Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I've done it. Let's talk it through. You are so lucky.
And if you have two or three, that's
Forget
it. Forget
Lottery.
it. Lottery.
Yeah. And you know what we all do, myself included, is we steamroll over those people to get the attention and appreciation of the people who will never show up for us like that.
Wow.
So like, you know, you may be my best friend and you might be all around me all the time, but those folks, those women at the mall that I don't know, they're the ones I'm really worried about.
Yeah. Trying to please or prove yourself to them. And you say, of course, we're all capable of being these friends.
Yes.
But especially if someone tells us a story that gets right up in our own shame, that's when it hits the nerve, right? You're human, imperfect, and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes. It's hard to practice compassion when we're struggling with our own authenticity or when our own worthiness is off balance.
And you know what means the most to me? What means the most to me is if I go to someone with my shame story, and my whole mantra is, you share with people who've earned the right to hear your story.
Damn, that is good.
Right?
Doggone it, that's
like, you have to earn the right to hear my story. It's an honor to hold space for me when I'm in shame. And so I want to share. And if I share with someone...
we need to just pause with that for a moment.
Okay.
Because this is how people get so messed up and violated. It's like the Bible says, casting your pearls before swine.
It's
You know,
true.
offering yourself up to people who don't deserve to have that offering.
That's right. And you have to think long and hard about who has earned the right to hear the story and with whom am I in a relationship that can bear the weight of the story.
Wow, that is powerful.
And if I go to someone and I share it and they come back with one of those bad, like not helpful, not empathic answers, and then a week later, a day later, an hour later, they call and say, I didn't show up for you. You were so much in my stuff. I couldn't be with you in that. That means even more.
So you're probably wondering who I am to talk about guilt and shame. So what I'll do is expect that you're worthy or that you need to hear this and share one of mine. So that story I promised you, I have to write this one down and read it to you because while the shame is gone, the pain is still very much there. It was 1993, and by this time I had learned life was harsh. I had lost people close to me. I had people I trusted let me down in soul-wounding ways. I had spent time in the mental ward. There were plenty of people needing my forgiveness, and I needed others in return. I was 18 and had been married since I was 16 with a beautiful baby boy. I was pregnant again. By this time, I had learned that not everyone's opinion mattered or could matter if I wanted to hold on to any sense of sanity. And I was struggling with a basic feeling of what the hell every day. I had constant nightmares. I was either deliriously happy, in a rage, or in a day that had been a day in the world that had been bled of all colors. I had been told I would be a teen mom statistic, that I was sinful, that I had wasted my potential. You name it, and I had heard it by this point. I was a bad influence. I might as well have embroidered myself a scarlet letter A. I was working 12 hours a day. I taught preschool from 6 to 6. I brought my little one with me to work every day, and my marriage was on shaky ground. Then I was pregnant again. Once again, I had the feeling, not just a feeling, I was told explicitly that I had once again let everyone down. We could not afford one baby, how would we afford another? I decided to pour all my hopes, all my dreams, all my ambitions into this baby to be, this little girl to be. I went back to church. I was baptized. I was determined. The harder life became, the more I tended to come out swinging. I would show them all, right? Then 4 months in, I started bleeding. I called a family member first. They were busy. This was my choice. It would be what it would be. Basically, the bless your heart you heard in the video just before. The next person I called was my husband, who was MIA. In his defense, I think he was at work that day. I made it to the hospital. I laid on that cold table alone, talking to the vessel of all my hopes and all my dreams. Please stay. Please don't go. Then the tech came in for the ultrasound. By this time, I knew her. I'd had a really difficult first pregnancy, and we had become friendly. We chatted. It's a very Southern thing to do, to make everyone comfortable in the worst situations. She began, and I watched the color slowly drain from her face. Her desperation mount as she tried to find, again and again, what she was looking for to reassure me. Then she was looking at me, tears running down her face, saying nothing. I asked her please, please to just tell me that I knew she wasn't supposed to, but please, please tell me. So she did. That all my hopes and all my dreams had died. The very heartbeat of the life I could imagine had stopped beating. I held on through the DNC. I held on through all the people, the things people say that they feel that they're supposed to say. I held on through the things people say that should never be said. And then I utterly and completely lost my mind. I am missing a lot of the next few years. I have a lot of memories just gone, but the feeling of shame that I was utterly broken, that I had come here broken, and I was irreparable as an individual soul remained. It took me a lifetime, what felt like many lifetimes, to even begin to heal that feeling. The feeling of utterly being out of place, out of time, and wrong on the deepest level. The beginning of better started with the whispers the universe continued to send me. No matter what idiot choices I made, that I had worth, that everything around me had meaning, the universe used nature, a couple of special beloved and beleaguered friends, cards in the mail that would randomly arrive, through the years wound a thread that I mattered. That as Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you can do better. If you've watched any of my videos, then you know that I place a really high value on literature. And this was one of those whispers from the universe that found me really, really, truly just when I needed to hear it. It was the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And I am going to read you The Dark Night of the Soul. The Screw Tape Letters, Part 6, The Dark Night of the Soul. My dear Wormwood, all human beings at some point experience what they call a dark night of the soul, a time of anguish and reflection. It is an expression that has little meaning to us, as we exist in an eternity of darkness, our natural and far preferable condition. The dead of the terrestrial night, however, is often when many human beings confront the terrors and fears of the day, including their own sins, without distraction. Your man is in the grip of such a moment. The falling out with his young woman over his behavior at the boss's party left him sleepless and distraught. And had you used this time wisely and pressed your advantage, you might have recovered the ground you lost during their quarrel. Instead, your situation has worsened considerably. Thought and reflection are only of use to us when they confirm a human being's conscious choice to sin rather than to obey the enemy. Should a moment of pause or reflection go too far, however, we face immense risk. Titrating this balance between unthinking animal impulse and a minimal but sufficient amount of self-awareness is the central task of a competent tempter. The ancient Greek humans, whose wisdom, thanks to us, is now mostly forgotten, understood this even before they knew the enemy. They did not refer to repentance, but to metanoia, to thinking again. It is a condition in which years of work can dissolve before you in a matter of minutes. Your man entered this condition during the night, and it continues even now. It must be stopped at once. You will no doubt protest that you extracted a fair amount of pain from your patient by repeating his own charges against himself in order to provoke the feelings of shame and anger upon which you fed for the moment. This was a singular error on your part. Instead of taunting him, "You fool," you should have been soothing him. As an emissary of hell, you are the voice of reason and reassurance, the calm baritone, not too threatening and not too chatty. That should have been explaining to him patiently that he is perfectly normal, that his young woman is an unreasonable and emotional female. Hysterical is a word we often teach men to use at such moments. And that he should join his co-workers and the boss while lifting their glasses to the old man, because they, after all, are doing the great work of the enemy, even if the patient's lover, friends, and family cannot possibly fathom the new and exciting way in which it is being accomplished. Of course, this is all a pack of lies and nonsense, but lies are the greatest weapon in our arsenal. And yet, you left them undeployed in your temporary enjoyment of the patient's suffering. Your missed opportunities are too many to number. He was insensitive to his lover, but instead of goading him to solve his shame by abandoning her, he is determined to seek her forgiveness. He spent the evening at the boss's party as a blathering hypocrite, praising the old man for things he knows to be sinful. But instead of convincing him to redouble his efforts, to be just like folks, to fit in, he is seeing his colleagues and especially himself in a new and unflattering light. And where were you? Prancing about and laughing, exhorting him to hate himself because you found it entertaining? How often must I warn you that the immediate or physical or mental suffering of any one human being is of very little use to us, and even poses great hazards to our cause? Do you not remember that the enemy's greatest counterattack in the last moments on a cross occurred after days of unimaginable torture? Meanwhile, you ignored any possibility of dragging your man toward the lights of the busy and sinful city, favorable ground to which I thoughtfully had you assigned precisely for such a contingency, because you forgot, yet again, that we damn human souls through forbidden pleasures as often, if not more, than through the despair of pain. It is clear to me now, however, that you would not have been able to exploit pain or pleasure in this instance because you allowed your man something that is useless to us but precious to human beings: time. You must never, in any circumstance, whether misery or elation, allow a human a moment's peace in which to reflect. If a man is suffering, we must crowd out all further reflection and torment him with pointless questions about why, leading him as speedily as possible to the conclusion that the enemy, who, has the power to grant all their wishes, must be to blame for his affliction. If he is experiencing pleasure, moments admittedly offensive to us, we must react instantly to defeat any notions of joy or gratitude, and instead convince him that the way he feels at that moment is the way he might feel forever. If only the enemy were not such a scold as to demand that at some point he push away from the table, get out of a bed, or walk away from a pub. When faced with true pains and pleasures, we are in some sense on the enemy's territory. This is why we always endeavor with alacrity to prevent them from truly tasting or appreciating either of them. Yes, Wormwood, they even embrace pain once they progress far enough with the enemy. We must force them to experience these moments like the animals they are, ramming our contaminated versions of these feelings down their gullets and preparing them like geese from whom we will later extract their diseased, fattened livers for our delectation. The patient will soon head back to his office, where there is still a chance to immerse him in the meaningless bustle of his work, and thus to convince him that his thoughts in the middle of the night are just so much nonsense. Focus on your work and see to it that he reaches no other conclusion. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. It's not the absence of fear, it's the acting in spite of the fear. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation. Hey, I want to get this one right, so I'm going to read it to you. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Theodore Roosevelt.
You cannot stay the way you are. You can go either one way or the other. So one way is a challenge, pushes you deeper into egoic reactivity and negativity and conflict with other human beings. So one effect that a challenge can have on a human being is it can make him or her more unconscious, more reactive, more deeply entrenched in the egoic patterns. The other thing, on the other hand, a challenge can have the effect of forcing you to become more conscious. I have experienced it in my own life when faced with I went through a kind of shift in consciousness when I was 29. Whenever something bad happened around me, I would usually go into reactive mode and become very unhappy or angry or even more depressed than I was already. And so it's very important to realize that the importance of using the adversity that inevitably arises in everybody's life, often just on a personal level or on a collective level, to recognize that as an opportunity for becoming more conscious instead of less conscious, for awakening out of the egoic mind pattern.
At the beginning of time, people were unconscious, and that consciousness emerged with all of its catastrophes, consciousness of death, for example. And one way out of the burden of consciousness was to return to unconsciousness. You can do that with alcohol. You can do that by being dependent. You can do that by failing to grow up. You refuse the burden of consciousness by becoming unconscious again. But there's another way forward, which is to become even more conscious. So the idea would be a little bit of consciousness is like an illness. But if you can expand that consciousness upwards enough, then it starts to become something that is its own cure. And that partly what your goal is while you suffer through life is to heighten your consciousness to the point where everything gets integrated enough so that that's proper medication for the disease of self-consciousness. And Jung believed that that was really that was one of the ideas that ran through the entire structure of Judeo-Christianity, although it wouldn't be limited to Judeo-Christianity. So it's more consciousness rather than less. It's more attention.
But localized community. There are some people that have as their priority principles around equality racially. There are some people who have the forefront a kind of expression of religiosity. Now, neither of those groups is wrong. Both of those ideas are important. Need those ideas continually be practiced in an integrated way by all groups at all times? No, that's homogenization. Globalization requires that we flatten out our differences. Tribalism and distinction and differences needn't be a negative thing unless they're escalated to the point of conflict. Who cares what's going on in someone else's mind or someone else's community if it isn't impacting you or your community? Can we not allow, as once was the norm, for across the globe different tribes to be living differently until the great monolithic colonizing cultures uprooted, unbolted from the kind of tender principles of personal sovereignty, outreaching into further and further deeper dominance, brought all of this stuff into a sort of a globalized mess. That's not the perfect sentence to express that, but what I'm saying is that tribalism, as long as people aren't fighting for the same resources, whether that's intellectual or physical resources, isn't a problem.
You know, because look,
You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place. No place at all. The price is high. The reward is great. Maya Angelou.
American opportunity has no limits, has been known to knock more than once. How about you very young people who see a tough life ahead? Well, when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, Booker T. Washington was a 9-year-old slave. Yet by the time he was 28, he became president of Tuskegee Institute. And at 8 months, Neil Armstrong took his first small baby step toward mankind and fell flat on his face. At 6 years old, Mickey Mantle was settling for a base on balls. At 7, Wilt Chamberlain nailed a practice hoop over his garage without a ladder. And at 8, Charles Lindbergh was flying a kite, wondering how it'd feel to be up that high. At 9, Burt Bacharach was thinking the piano lessons would never end. How many of you are pushing 50 and complaining that the country is going to hell? Crispus Attucks was in his 40s when he died on State Street in Boston, fighting for the freedom that we share. And John F. Kennedy was 44 when he asked not what his country could do for him, but what he could do for his country. And how many of you over 65 are just settling down now to rest after a busy life? Well, a fellow by the name of Eisenhower, who had already lived one lifetime as a soldier, was reelected to the presidency when he was 67 years young. Well, by now I've made my point, or I never will.
Said, Cyril Tyson, everyone look at him. He does not have the body type that would excel in track. And they used him as an example. And he says, what? No one is going to tell me what I can't do in my life. And he used that as a reason to start running. And he started track in that moment. He decided that one of his next tasks in life would be to take up running and excel at it. Within a few years of that, he became world class. At one time, had the 5th fastest time in the world. In 1948, the Olympics was not yet ready to come back to us because we're still roiling from the Second World War. Instead, there was still an Olympics. It was called the GI Olympics, and it was held in Hitler Stadium. Whoa. So he competed alongside Jewish athletes. So there they are competing against the New York Athletic Club, and his best friend, Johnny Johnson, was coming around the back stretch, might have been the quarter mile, coming on the final straightaway. and a runner from the New York Athletic Club is a few paces behind him. And Johnny Johnson overhears that runner's coach say, "Catch that nigger." And he overheard this. And so what did he say to himself? He said, "This is one he ain't gonna catch." And that extended his lead to the finish line. At the end of the day, what matters is for who and what you become in life. For me, at least, was what level of wisdom did he glean in his life and then successfully communicate to me, either by example or by just explicit statement. And that combination of those two means of delivery had some important impacts. We live in a very fractured world today. I don't know if it's the most fractured ever, but what is clear is that the internet has enabled, and social media have enabled people to tribalize. You might go your whole life without ever finding another person who thinks the earth is flat. You go online and you see them all. So you have ways to say why you are different from other people. And I don't know that that's always a healthy place to be. You can draw a line in the sand between people who transgress but do not hold power over you from those who transgress and do. So the coach who said, "Catch that nigger," he doesn't have power over Johnny Johnson unless you allow him to. This is a famous quote from Martin Luther King. You can only be ridden if your back is bent. I apportioned my emotional reactions to where it actually mattered for my life's trajectory. When I grew up, it was very common to hear the phrase, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me." This was an inoculation against hate speech, really, against just evil people, just nasty people. You were able to develop a system of defenses against unpleasant people out there. I haven't heard that phrase in a long time. I don't hear it recited in the elementary schools. What I think has happened over the years is we came to learn as a civilization that words can be hurtful and words can sort of change your mood or set you into a depression. What I see on the flip side of that coin, however, is people are less able to deal with the very same people who are around today who were around back then, who are calling you names, the people who might be bullying you on the internet by saying things about you. I don't know that we have how to defend against that now other than seeing a counselor for your emotional state. I can say from the era in which I grew up, I don't give a rat's ass what you say to me, okay? Unless you are between me and some goal, then I'll have to navigate that some way. So now what do I need to do because you're in my way? Do I dig under you, go around you, leap over you? You gotta navigate it. I think high school, that's where you learn how to deal with difficult people. There's not a single high school movie that doesn't show the angst of the cliques that have formed and what the relationships are that they have to one another. It's this microcosm of real stuff that goes on in the real world. There are beautiful people and they will get jobs you're not gonna get, okay? There are people who are nasty. You're gonna have to navigate them. There are people who you cannot interact with for whatever reason or another. They're gonna be in the cubicle next to you in your workplace. So I think we undervalue the total social pot that people are tossed into in their high school experience. For me, what I do for the public is almost 80+% of it is driven by duty, not by ambition. Because I can do something, and if I can do it better than others, and it's for a greater good in society, I would be irresponsible if I did not. That many people look for meaning in life. And I'm thinking to myself, you have more power than that. You have the power to create meaning in your life rather than passively look for it. So for me, I create the meaning. And meaning to me is, do I know more about the world today than I did yesterday? That enhances meaning for me. And if that accumulates and accrues daily, in a month you know way more than you did than just that day later, so that you continue to grow. No one ever told me that I had to search for meaning in life to begin with. So that was never even a part of me. My first question of me wasn't, where do I find meaning? It was, how do I create meaning? And that started early teens. School, they view you as this empty vessel that they pour information in, and you test it over here, you get a high grade, you're praised. You might even give the commencement speech. Is that who become the shakers and movers of the world? I can tell you this, if Einstein were here and we're talking with Einstein, we could talk to him for hours and hours and hours. And you know what question will never come out of our mouths? Is, what college did you go to? I want to go to that same college. I bet most of your people who've sat in this chair, it's not about what college they went to. It's about their own initiative, their own drive, their own ambitions, their own curiosity. That is not taught in school, sadly. School should, as a minimum, preserve that curiosity for you. If you lost some of it, because it's not going to be in all of us, put it back in. So that when you graduate school, you can give literal meaning to the word commencement. Commencement means beginning. It doesn't mean ending. And so you leave school and you say to yourself, I now know how to learn. I now have a curiosity of all things I have yet to be exposed to. And I will now become a lifelong learner. I'm a scientist, raised Catholic, but started drifting when I was like in 3rd grade. None of it was making much sense to me. There were no decisions made in the house that referenced the Bible or God or Jesus or anything. So in that sense, decision making was secular and rationally informed. And I thank my parents for that. I valued that as someone being raised by them, because it meant if something didn't make sense, they'd, well, do it because I said so. Well, that's not a rational reply to your child. They would have the reason for it, and then we discuss the reasons. Early on, as I became more visible, I'd get letters, and people would ask about God. And I don't know much about God, so my early letters were, well, science is, and religion is that, and I can't help you any further. But then I thought to myself, that's not fair to the person who wrote the question. They're coming from a place, some religious tradition, whatever that tradition is, and if I'm receiving that letter, there's a contract, an implicit contract between me and the person who's seeking my guidance, my wisdom, my insights. And I owe it to that person to know as much as possible as I can about where they're coming from. I read things that take me to places where other people think. If I'm an educator, I want to know that. Because when you're speaking to me and I have some understanding of you, I can navigate your receptors for learning. In this book, what took me a year to answer one of the questions, it was a Jewish woman. Okay, she's Orthodox, she's really religious, she's got a 10-year-old son going to Hebrew school, he's on the autism spectrum, and he says, by the way, one day he came home and said he doesn't believe in God. And he thinks Bible stories can't possibly be true. And she asks him, how did you come to think this? And he said, cosmos. I was like, okay, so I'm in deep now. Okay, should I read further? Where is this going to go? This can only end badly, I'm saying to myself. And it turned out she was very open. She said, I don't want to make him believe things that might not be true. He respects you. I know that, and I thank you for that. But sometimes I have my doubts too about these stories in the Bible. So I just don't know, can science and God coexist? And I just want to be a good parent. I want to teach you how to think about the world. And then you say, I have a new way to understand the world. And you just run off. You don't even look back, because a new level of hunger has descended upon you. And methods and tools to feed that hunger are now accessible to you. So my impact would be that others are impacted and they don't even remember that I had something to do with it. On my tombstone, I want the epitaph, be ashamed to die until you have scored some victory for humanity. You want the world to be, any of us, I think, should want the world to be a little better off for you having lived in it. That doesn't mean people praising you, no, not even about that. So what do you have to give with no expectation of return?